Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Return to Grace, which is episode 13 of season 4 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of the series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the 4th season episode Return to Grace. So Return to Grace is the episode in which Dukat got demoted, I should say, for when it was found out that he had a daughter out of wedlock with a Bajoran, and his career is in disgrace, and he's now captain of a tiny little useless freighter, and he is ordered to take Major Kira to a Cardassian Bajoran conference in Cardassian space. However, when they arrive, they find that everyone at the conference was killed as it was destroyed by a Klingon bird of prey. However, this tiny little freighter is no match for a bird of prey, so much so that when the bird of prey could have easily destroyed it, it chose not to. However, Kira comes up with the plan to use one of the outpost disruptors and mount it onto the freighter and then lure the Klingon ship in and attack it. This plan works. However, the Klingons' weapons are still operational, so they try to destroy the freighter. However, with the Klingon shields down, Kira simply beams aboard the ship with Dukat, and they hijack the Klingon transporters and transport the Klingons over to the freighter and transport Dukat's crew over to the Klingon bird of prey, where Dukat then destroys the freighter, killing all the Klingons. Dukat then tells the Cardassian government about this find. However, they're not really interested because they'd rather negotiate a peace. So Dukat decides to go rogue and become a renegade and go off attacking the Klingons on his one tiny bird of prey. However, his daughter Ziyal is with him, and Kira, who really cares about Ziyal, doesn't want her to live that kind of life, the kind of life she was forced to have where she's constantly in fear for her life. So she asks Dukat to let Ziyal live with her on Deep Space Nine, and he agrees. So, funny thing about this episode is when I first saw it, I remember really liking it. I really liked it. I was like, oh wow, this is so interesting that, Dukat's becoming a rogue and they're actually doing, interesting new things with their characters, and they're putting Ziyal on the station, and this is very interesting. I was really into it. And part of that was I didn't know what they were going to do with this. I was excited at the prospect of Dukat becoming this renegade attacking the Klingons. And they didn't do much with it, turns out. He appeared once in the episode Apocalypse Rising, where he was being a dick to Sisko while escorting him to this Klingon outpost. It was almost the exact same plot line that Unification did with the Klingon ship escorting Picard and Data to Romulus, and he was being a dick to them the whole time. So I felt like they were just copying what they already did. And then the next time we see Dukat again, at first he's pretending to be an ally to Sisko, but then it's revealed that he actually made an alliance to become the leader of Cardassia by having Cardassia join the Dominion, so an enemy. So basically that episode doesn't count. We only see him once, and they don't really do much with it. So in other words, they didn't do much with this storyline. So looking at it in retrospect, I'm less excited about it than I was when I first saw it. But more to the point, back when I watched it for the first time, I wasn't really thinking analytical about it the way I am now, especially doing my channel, especially going through and analyzing what the meaning of the show as a whole, what the meaning of what they're trying to say with each character, what is their character arc, and just analyzing how each character is portrayed and how consistent they are throughout the show and what this episode is trying to say. And after, putting my thinking cap on, so to speak, I'm really bothered by this episode because it seems to be portraying Dukat as a good guy. Now, I've seen a lot of pushback to that. In fact, I think I just watched this review that brought up the fact that a lot of people complained that Dukat's coming off too much like a good guy. Or someone even said anti-hero, but I think it's worse than anti-hero. I would say good guy, because anti-hero still describes someone who's a villain. Like, they're the opposite of a hero. It's kind of like, but they're usually like the protagonist of the show, but they're not good. Like, they're evil, so they call them anti-hero. Like, to me, the biggest example of this is Walter White in Breaking Bad. However, I don't think Dukat was an anti-hero. I think they're trying to make him a good guy, which I think is worse. But anyway, this YouTube video I watched said that they disagreed with the complaints that they were trying to make Dukat a good guy, because in this episode he is clearly antagonistic to Kira. He keeps hitting on her when she clearly does not like it and does not reciprocate it, and has an ego, and he's only worried about getting his job back, and Kira reminds the audience and Ziyal constantly that he was a war criminal who was responsible for countless atrocities. However, that being said, I don't think all those things that person pointed out, well, especially not the thing about him only caring about the career, because at the end of the episode they actually showed that's not the case, because he's offered his old job back. He's offered a prestigious job, and he turns it down because he'd rather go fight Klingons. So this proves that he is not only worried about his career. Now, later on in Season 5, we'll show that he wants to become the ruler of Cardassia, but that whole episode, the whole two-parter in Season 5, by Infernal's Light and what's the other one, in Purgatory's Shadow, I call that course correction the episode. And someone, when I called it that, someone was thinking that, like, I was saying that in a negative light. I'm not saying it as a negative light. It's actually a positive thing that they're course correcting the wrong path that the show was going down, and then chose to make it go down the right path. That's actually a really good thing. But how I feel about that two-parter, I will get to eventually when I get to Season 5. Point is, that doesn't apply here, because that's just a retcon they do next season. So at the end of this episode, and judging the episode by the episode's judge, they make it clear that he's not so egotistical after all, because he actually doesn't care that much about his career, because he turns it down. So as for the other two things about him constantly hitting on Kira when she doesn't like it, and the fact that Kira constantly reminds the audience that he committed atrocities, I don't think that's good enough, and I'll tell you why. Because of my reaction when I first watched this episode, and because I'm sure I'm not the only one who had this reaction. I'm sure a lot of people had this reaction, because I think that is what the kind of reaction that the episode is trying to evoke, and that's the reaction of going, yeah, Dukat, yeah, throughout most of this episode, throughout all the episode, actually, except for, him hitting on Kara. That's the only time we're like, fuck that fucking guy, or when he's talking about wanting his job back. But again, the job thing is undermined by the ending. So it's just a Kira flirting thing. Because throughout most of the episode, he's like working with Kira, coming up with a plan, trying to right this wrong and get the Klingon ship that, killed all the innocent Bajorans and Cardassians. And then at the end of the episode, he's gone off to fight the good fight, to be a terrorist, to be a rebel the same way Kira was, and fight against the evil of the Klingons. So they're saying he's a good guy. I mean, he's working with Kira, our main character, one of the first officer of the show, who is our hero, and he's on her team. Now, I've heard, again, I think it was the same YouTube video made the argument that With Dukat, they're not saying that he's a good guy. They're saying that it just so happens that his interests align with our hero's interests. But I think that still makes him a good guy, right? If they're both fighting for justice and truth and the Starfleet way or whatever, then that makes him a good guy. That, you are actively rooting for him. As I said, I was like, oh yeah, Dukat, go. Like, I shouldn't be saying that. This guy's Hitler. He was in charge of death camps, worked people to death, sexually assaulted women, manipulated them into sexual relationships with himself by using his authority and his power, and let children starve to death. I should not, in any circumstance, under any circumstance, be saying yay Dukat. Never. And that's my issue with this episode. Yeah, so that, to me, that overrides they're reminding you that he's done horrible things, and look, he's being a dick by flirting with Karen, look, he's being egotistical. Not good enough, damn it, not good enough, to quote Picard. I'm sorry. In no way, shape, or form should I ever be cheering for the sadistic fuck. His interests should never be aligned with our heroes. That's just it. And if you want to talk about, because the argument they made is, that makes him a complex character. The fuck it does. It makes him an inconsistent character. That's what it makes him. If you want to talk about a complex character who's a Cardassian, who's immoral, who does a lot of disgusting things, who is definitely not a good guy, definitely not a hero, but someone that we do and should root for from time to time, because sometimes his alliances or his motivations happen to align with our heroes, that's Garak. Garak is someone that I don't mind them sort of cheering for Garak and being like, yeah, he's on a good team, because the show will often remind us with episodes like In the Pale Moonlight or Second Sight, or is this, no, not Second Sight, what is it called? Second Skin, sorry, I get the seconds made up. Mixed up, Second Skin, and certain other episodes that remind you that this is not a good dude. But at the same time, he isn't as egotistical as Dukat. He will do what he thinks is best for Cardassia. And a lot of times what he thinks is best for Cardassia, because he's smart, lines up with what our main characters want. But still, he's not to be trusted. Improbable Cause is another example. Dias Cass, because he's tortured Odo because their interests were no longer aligned. It reminds us that this is not a good dude. So that is not the way that Garak is portrayed is consistent. Although there's a few episodes during this station takeover arc, I think they make him out to be too much of a good guy, but then they make up for that with In the Pale Moonlight later in the season, so it's fine. So the way they portray Garak, is consistent throughout the show. It makes sense. It's okay to root for him to time, because you know underneath that he is not a good dude. Dukat, on the other hand, is totally different. As I said, in no circumstance should I be rooting for this fucking war criminal. No circumstance. And his portrayal in this episode and Indiscretion and Apocalypse Rising is inconsistent with his character, inconsistent with him being a good dude. Like I was complaining about my original review I did for the Maquis two-parter, that they made Dukat too much like the hero, but in fact what they did there was actually okay when I look at it as a whole. What they're doing here is much, much worse. And I think out of the 3 episodes I named, which so happened to be in Season 4 and the first half of Season 5, where they did that stupid fucking Klingon being the enemy's story arc, out of those 3 episodes, this one happens to be the worst. in my humble opinion. Because even though, yes, you see him being a dick, you see him hitting on Kira when she doesn't want it, but he's still like the hero of this episode. And that never should be the case. So, my opinion of this episode has evolved greatly. The more I look at it in the context of the show as a whole and what Dukat's character should be. In fact, and I talked about this before, there's a lot of people out there that apparently they prefer the Dukat from this season and they dislike episodes like Waltz or Covenant or, his arc in the final, 10-parter final arc where he teams up with Kai Wynn, and they say, oh, that's when they destroyed his character. Actually, no. That's when they were completely true to his character. This shit that they're doing in season 4 and 5, this is when they destroyed his character. And the argument they'll make is, oh, he's just a mustache-twirly evil villain. But I once read an article, I think it's one my sister sent me, and it was referring to novels. And it was talking about how too many novels were trying too hard to humanize their villains and to show both sides, and saying that, sometimes that can work, but they were doing it too much to the point of sometimes people are just evil. Sometimes people don't really have any good in them. And I don't like using the word evil, though, to be honest, because I don't really believe in it, because I think it is too simplistic of a term. However, there are people that exist that are psychopaths, sociopaths, who don't really have any morality in them whatsoever. Those people exist. And clearly, the way they're setting up Dukat, he is one of them. Garrick isn't so much. Garrick just has a different set of rules and laws. What he considers morality is very different. And I would equate Garrick more to someone like Sloane from Section 31. Whereas Dukat is more on the lines of just evil. He's just evil. He's a sociopath. He's a psychopath. He's egotistical. He's a narcissist. He is not a good dude. So under no circumstance should I be cheering for him. No circumstance. I don't give a shit to be like, oh, look, he's still being an asshole. Not good enough. Damn it. Anyway, so all that out of the way, I don't know. For me, I don't know if I have that much more to talk about this episode, because for me, that defines the episode. Okay, so on top of that, sort of similar to this, like it's connected to that topic, I don't like the way Kira teams up with him in this episode. Now, granted, whenever he goes hard out hitting on her, she becomes icy and gets defensive, especially if he tries to defend the occupation. But there's other moments in the episode where they laugh, they smile, he invites her to dinner, she actually goes, and they, drink and have conversation, and they team up and come up with plans and work together, and she's like, we work together. It's only when Dukat gets personal and says, we make a great team, Major, that she starts to get icy and pushes away. But throughout most of the episode, they're acting like buddy-buddy. And I'm not okay with that. And that reminds me of the dumb-ass idea that Mark Alimo apparently was pushing for, and so is Ira Stephen Bear, of putting Dukat and Kira in a relationship. And I love Nana Visitor for this, because when she heard about this idea, she went to Ira Stephen Bear and said, absolutely not. No way in hell, you are not going to do this. I will not play this. And good on her for doing that. That was the correct reaction to that circumstance. And what Kira said, or what Nana Visitor said, she's like, if you want to put Kira in a relationship with the Cardassian man, sure, I'll go with that. That would be an interesting thing. But not Dukat. And I totally agree. Like, I could not agree more with her. And it's a shame that Ira never took her up on that offer, because I actually think that would be an interesting storyline, to put her in a relationship with a Cardassian guy who's actually a good guy. Like, not Garrick, because no. She's Professor Hatred towards Garrick, so that wouldn't make any sense. It would have to introduce a new character. So, yeah, I mean, if they did that, like, that would be interesting. But Dukat, that would be fucking stupid. And so Ira Stephen Bear is like, okay, fine, I won't put you in a relationship with Dukat, but I'll put your mother in a relationship with Dukat, which was horrendous, but I'll get to that when I get to it. Horrendous, such a stupid idea. Ira Stephen Bear just gets these dumb ideas in his head, and he just gets stuck and obsessed with doing them, or a version of them, when he just let it go. It was a dumb idea. Or if you want to do a version of it, do the version that Nana Visitor suggested. Put Kira with a random Cardassian who's actually a good dude. But anyway, and so that annoyed me about this episode too. The moments where they were actually like smiling at each other and working as a team, and that it was the same problem with the indiscretion. But I think it, like the whole thing about laughing about him sitting on the spike, or whatever. But I think it's worse in this episode, honestly. Especially the ending where she was like taking Ziyal away, and they were all saying goodbye, and she was being very friendly. They're all sitting there smiling, and she's like, well, you know, this, or Dukat says something like, oh yes, well, this makes us linked now. And Kira's like, oh, that pleases you. And he's like, pleases me? Gives me a reason to live. And her reaction was to laugh and smile back, where her reaction should have been, shut the fuck up, you creep. Get the fuck away from me. Don't make me change my mind about looking after your daughter. That should have been her reaction, quite frankly. Instead, they were like, sitcom ending. And that is unacceptable. Unacceptable, frankly. Yeah. So, what else with this episode? Oh, the Klingon. I suppose I should talk about the Klingon of it all. As I mentioned in my review of Way of the Warrior, that I was so against them making the Klingons the enemies. I think it was a gigantic mistake. Apparently the original idea was to make the Vulcans the enemy. That would honestly be worse. You shouldn't have made anyone the enemies. You should just focus more on the Dominion. And if you want to make someone the enemies for an episode, fine, but undo it at the end of the episode. Like, keeping the Klingons the enemy and making them the bad guys of this episode is another thing about this episode that pisses me off. Every episode that touches on the Klingons being the enemies gets a giant ding from me. Even like one of my favorite episodes of the entire franchise, The Visitor, they have one scene when they mention the Klingons took over Deep Space Nine in the future, and that dinged it for me. That's why it only made like my top 20 instead of my top 10 greatest episodes of all time. Quite frankly, it was a big reason why. So, we got The Way of the Warrior. Just going down the list here. Sort of Kahless mentions that the Klingons are enemies, so I'm going to count that. And then Return to Grace, Sons of Moog, the very next episode, Rules of Engagement, 5, let's see, I'm going to count Broken Link, because the main cliffhanger on that was that the Klingons, and it was underlining the whole episode about how the Klingons are going to start a war, Apocalypse Rising, and North of Battle to the Strong. So, 8 episodes that had the Klingons be the main enemy. And you know what I say a lot? I've heard, again, there's some people who are like, oh, it's only 8 episodes. Come on, don't make such a big deal. Sorry, it should have been 1. It should have been 0. But the highest 1, I'll allow you 1. It should not be 8. It should not be any more than 1. Because it's a stupid idea. The Klingons work way, way better as uneasy allies, and having them be the bad guys that are Hero Dukat, the fucking Hitler, the fucking concentration camp owner who murdered children to death. He's the hero fighting against the Klingons. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Anyway. Let's talk about Ziyal. So I mentioned in my review for Indiscretion that Ziyal was played by 3 different actors, and I incorrectly guessed that it was a different actor in A Return to Grace, which is the second time we see her, than Indiscretion, which is untrue. As I was surprised to learn, it was actually the same actress who played her in Indiscretion and Return to Grace. However, the next time we see Ziyal in the episode For the Cause, that will be played by a different actress, and that actress will only appear in that one episode as Ziyal, and then so the next 6 episodes that Ziyal appears in will be played by the third actress. So she'll be the actress who plays Ziyal for the majority of the screen time. 3 episodes in season 5 and 3 episodes in season 6 until her death. So I talked about how the character was 14 years old, as described as being 14 years old in Indiscretion, and how I guessed that the reason why they got different actresses to play her is because they wanted to make her look older, especially when they put her in a relationship with Garrick. Now, when I was listening to the Delta Flyers, Mark Alimo, Mark Alimo, who was guessing in the podcast when they talked about Indiscretion, he talked about how he met 3 different women playing his daughter, which actually shouldn't be true because he wasn't in the episode For the Cause, which is the only episode that the second actress who plays Ziyal, so I doubt he ever met her. Maybe he just misspoke, or maybe he just happened to show up to the set that day or something. I don't know. But anyway, he was talking when they were guessing. Actually, I think it's Armin Shimmerman who guessed, because they were trying to guess why they keep having to find a different actress to play her. His guess was that they didn't like all the Cardassian makeup. And that could be true, but I was looking at the other appearances that the first actress who played Ziyal, who played her in Indiscretion and this episode, Kaya Baton, or is it Saya Baton? I don't know if it's a hard C or a soft C, but anyway, so she had appeared on Star Trek 2 other times after this. She, I think most notably was in the Voyager episode Drive, where she played like Harry Kim's love interest, but she turned out to be the bad guy of the episode. I remember actually what she was doing because I fucking hate that episode, but we'll have to watch it again once I get to it. But and she played an alien. Granted, it wasn't like full Cardassian makeup. It was just like the ears were funny or something. She played, forehead alien. But and then her other Trek appearance was in Enterprise and the terrible episode Bound, where she played an Orion woman, where she had to be completely made up as green. Now, I suppose you could argue that neither one of those makeup jobs were as bad as the Cardassian ones, so maybe that's why they recast her. But it could have just been a scheduled thing for once, and for 2, maybe because they wanted to make her look older. That was my thought. So, I looked up the actress's age at the time that they filmed the Deep Space Nine episode as Ziyal. So, I'm just going to call her Kaya. Kaya Batten was 24 years old. when she made these 2 episodes, which is older than I thought, because it was my original thought that they got an actual teenager to play her, because she did look quite young, particularly in Indiscretion. She looks older here. That's why I thought it was a different actress, but it's the same one apparently. And she's 24. Now, having a 24-year-old play a 14-year-old's not that big of a stretch. TV shows do this all the time. Movies do it all the time because it's easier to work with older actors. And she looks young. But in, the episode Drive, which only came out a few years after this, she's playing a full-on adult. Anyway, and then there's the second Ziyal, who Tracy Middendorf. Yeah, Middendorf. Tracy Middendorf. She was 26 when she appeared as Ziyal in For the Cause, so not that much older, around the same age. Still, so they didn't age her up that much when she met Garrick for the first time. However, this was before they were in an actual relationship. In fact, you could argue that in the episode For the Cause, they were kind of just friends. They're just talking about she just wanted to hang out with another Cardassian. Forgetting that she's half Bajoran. There's plenty of Bajorans in the station, but whatever. I guess her Cardassian features are more prominent than her Bajoran ones, but still. Now, I'll talk about these actors later when I get to the episodes that they're in, but I'll just quickly point out that Tracy Middendorf, I knew her from Lost, from the episode Through the Looking Glass. She played Bonnie, who was one of the others who was in the Looking Glass station who took Charlie captive, and I recognized her. And I've seen her in other things. I recognize her every time I see her. I'm like, hey, that's Bonnie from Lost. And I had no idea that she played Ziyal. I was shocked to learn that. Anyway, third Ziyal actor who played her the most, who played her for 6 episodes, so it's the majority of who Ziyal is, Melanie Smith. She was 35 years old when she played Ziyal. 35. So, a 24-year-old playing a 14-year-old, okay. Stretching it, but I can buy. 26, still stretching it even more, but fine, okay. Not 35. And to be honest, I'm not too shocked to find out she was 35, because it was obvious they age dropped. So I think the reason why they got her was not that Tracy Middendorf didn't want to do the show anymore. I think it's because they wanted to age her up. They're like, she's 26-year-old's not old enough. We want her to be in a relationship with this 50-year-old man, so let's make her look 35. I don't know if you say she looks 35, but it definitely looks like she's in her late 20s at the least. And the character's supposed to be 14. Honestly, I think they want you to forget that fact. I think they're trying to retcon it to be like, no, she's actually in her 20s so that she can be in a relationship with Garrick, but still 35. In fact, the place where I saw this actress was in an episode of Seinfeld where she played Seinfeld's girlfriend that came out a couple years before she played Ziyal. So she was playing a full-on adult who's the girlfriend of a full-on adult before going on to play a 14-year-old later. But anyway, I will talk a bit, get into a bit more detail about these actors when I get to their respective episodes. I don't really have a favorite Ziyal. It might be Tracy Middendorf, to be honest, but they're fine. It's just their ages is the thing that bothers me. That's all. And the fact that they put Ziyal with Garrick was terrible. But anyway, and so I don't mind Kaya Baton. I think she was good in this episode. I liked her interactions with Kira and how she was like, teach me how to fight, and Kira I thought it was actually a good character moment for Kira. The fact that she's like, she reminds me of me when I was that age, and I don't want her to go through what I went through. I thought that was That was quite powerful, honestly. So, anyway, I would now like to thank my Patreon supporters very much for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the channel. I'd like to give a big special thanks to Brandon Neilhouse and Jordan Johnson. Thank you so very, very much for your strong support. I'd also like to give a shout out to Tyler Cease, Benjamin Mead, Antarius, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Migalisio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Britton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So, we do have a few Patreon comments on this episode. Hold on, I'm just checking Facebook, though. I can't remember whether or not I have any Facebook comments on this episode, so I'm just checking that real quick. I didn't do this in advance because it slipped my mind, because if you want to leave comments on my Facebook or Blue Sky page, you can do that. It's just 50 words or less. You can links to both those pages are in description below. So yes, we do have one Facebook comment that says, I'm a sucker for all Dukat episodes, whether they are good or not. I feel it moves the overall story along. I like this episode. Fair enough. So, let's get to our Patreon comments, which our Patreon supporters can do a bit longer comments. And so we'll start with Kyrie091, who says, Return to Grace, more like please burn my face, so that I don't have to watch this episode again. This is one where Damar is there, but they didn't quite know he was Damar yet, so he's just sort of some rando jackass Cardassian. Cardassian? More like Fartassian. Anyway, this episode is okay. It furthers the Ziyal story, which is kind of meh, but at least she's not humping Garrick yet. That romance just didn't work, did it, Mark? Garrick and Ziyal, no chemistry, and it's weird. Unlike Chakotay in 7 of 9. Now there's a meaningful romance, and is not completely shoehorned in for absolutely no reason. Anyways, yeah, this one is half plate of fucks. Great, this kind of sucks. Yeah, I forgot to talk about Damar. I can't believe I forgot to talk about Damar. This is his first appearance, and they do make a big deal in the documentary. They bring it up how in this episode he's basically just yes, aye sir, I'll arm the faces, aye sir. He's just a yes man. He's just a henchman. He's just a nobody. Barely has any lines. And then they make him like this important military leader, like the leader of Cardassia, and then he starts the resistance, so it becomes one of the most important episodes towards the end of the show, or most important characters, towards the end of the show. And that, I love that. I love that they kept him around, that they were consistent, that they didn't just introduce a new character in Call to Arms and be like, this is now Dukat's, second right-hand man. No, they kept the same one. He also appears in Apocalypse Rising. And that episode, he's more of a dick. I think this episode, he's not that much of a dick. He's actually very friendly to Kira and Ziyal. It's the next episode, the Apocalypse Rising, he starts being a dick to Sisko and the others. And then, especially in the Dominion Takeover arc, they make him a total asshole. But I'm fine with that. That's fine. I'm just glad they just kept the same character. Very interesting. Had a great character arc. And by the way, speaking of that final 10-episode arc that ended the show, throughout this episode they were trying to make comparisons to Kira and her experience as a resistance fighter, as a terrorist, and how she's going to teach Cardassians how to be a terrorist. I think that storyline was handled so much better in that ending arc than it was here. It made so much more sense. It was more in line. So that's another ding against this episode. Anyway, I should mention that Please Burn My Face. I actually like that. I think that's a good one. Good job. I give it 10 plates of fucks out of great this sucks. Anyway, next comment is from Benjamin Mead, who says, okay, this is the worst Dukat is nice episode. He acts like some kind of noble, heroic rogue, and noble he is not. I do really like the idea of a ragtag group of freighter folks taking on and defeating a warship and mounting a planetary gun on a freighter is badass. Too bad it has to be Dukat doing all the heroics. Totally agree. Could not agree more. But you do remind me of the whole freighter thing, because this is something I was thinking throughout I was watching the episode was, why are they sending a dinky, tiny, defenseless freighter to carry a very important diplomatic figure to a peace conference in the middle of a war zone? Like, what? That makes no sense. Like, if it's the Cardassians who want to send the Cardassian ship, at least send a good one. You know, that's capable of defending itself. But you know why it was a freighter, because of plot. So the episode could happen. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, Damar is one of the best recurring characters of any show, as his introduction isn't anything special and where it leads to. Dukat is a nasty piece of work. All he cares about is himself and oddly his daughter Ziyal. Does he even care about his other kids? The reason why he cares for Ziyal so much is he's trying to trick people that he actually has a soul. So when Dukat shows any form of kindness or respect to others, it's just a game for him, he is pure evil. So when episodes portray him as being nice, he isn't out of character. Dukat has two masks, just like a serial killer. He reminds me of Ted Bundy as someone who can be charming and kind of complete strangers and then snap on the same night. When most serial killers are caught, people who are close to them are completely shocked to find out his or her hidden hobby that really should be illegal hobby. Ted Bundy worked in a crisis center, so he saved lives on the same night he would go out and take someone else's life. So is Dukat, or even my favorite person to torment, Worf, out of character when they do things that pisses all off because of the way they are acting? Dukat is trying to convince people he is a really nice guy, but fails miserably as everybody knows he is 100% pure evil. So my rating is 8. Worf becomes a better character when Dax and Martok notice him out of 10. Have you reviewed the ship, as Worf is a complete prick in that episode and then he cries to Dax on Risa? The Dukat story will continue. So I have unfortunately reviewed the ship, but I guess you could slip in your comment for that in another episode that's surrounding it. So I think that's some nice headcanon you got there, Steven, but I think that's all it is. I think you're trying to make excuses for the show, no offense. That is because when I see this episode, like, your explanation makes sense. You bring up good evidence, good examples like Ted Bundy and all this other shit. But I think you're giving the show way too much credit. I don't think that. I don't get that's what they're going for when I watch episodes like this. Because, as I said, I'm going, yay, Dukat! And under no circumstance, none, not even saying, oh, he's a two-faced serial killer. No, not good enough. No circumstance, none, zero circumstance should I be cheering for Dukat. Plain and simple. And on top of that, just like Garrick, plain and simple. And on top of that, in no circumstance should Kira be smiling and hanging out with him and having a good time. None. Sorry. So I really don't think that's I don't think, when I watch this episode, I don't see the writers being, oh, look, he's a two-faced serial killer. I see them going, oh, he's the hero now. But that is, that's just my humble opinion. Anyway, next comment is from Ricky, who says, "This is the worst Dukat Nice Guy episode, as he should never be an ally or even to help this tyrant dictator mass murderer. To be honest, the episode is kind of boring and has not much to say. However, this is the first episode where we are introduced to Damar, who at this point is a nothing character, but once the Dominion War arc begins and continues all the way to the finale, I mean, this is probably the best character in Star Trek, where you have a yes sir type of guy and then evolves to a pretty important and figure and contributes to the show overall and makes him interesting in retrospect. That is how you write a character. That is how you write character development. Looking right at you, Rick Berman and Joe Manowski, Voyager. So my rating is 4 out of 10. Now, to be fair to Joe Manowski, which I totally agree that he's not a good writer, but to be fair to him, they did do a good job of character development with 709 in season 4. But to be unfair to him, from my understanding, that's actually Brannon Braga who did most of that, not Joe Manowski. So I take that back. Rick Berman for sure doesn't know how the fuck. He wouldn't know character development if it knocked him on the head and gave him a black eye. But anyway, I agree. Like, it is very impressive that they took a nothing character and turned him into something important rather than just recasting and getting a different guy, a different character to be Dukat. They kept the same character, and that is noteworthy. That is impressive. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, "A lot of things feel wrong. Dukat being a good guy, Klingons being the enemy, and finally the message that a diplomatic solution is not a good option. Concerning Dukat, I appreciate that he is not one-dimensional villain, but he is clearly portrayed too noble here. It's interesting that Damar is introduced in an episode where Dukat founds a Cardassian resistance, something that he will do himself later on. Still, the episode features great acting and dialogue, so I will give it 7 out of 10. So just to slight correction, it's something that Damar will do better later on, or a storyline that will be better later on. But no, totally agree. Dukat should never be a good guy under any circumstance. Any. Like, it's not like dynamic villains. It's not a dynamic. It doesn't make him a dynamic character. It makes him an inconsistent one. But anyway, next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, "This is an episode on my skip list, and yet in terms of continuity, it is important. The introduction of Damar, a scenario where Dukat is disowned by the Cardassian government and culture, the importance of his love for his daughter, and yet this episode is our main characters, a Kira-centered episode. Like most episodes this season, I want to skip. Back in season 1, she was my favorite character, and episodes that feature her showing amazing character growth and Visitor in general truly nails what is in the script. But the attempted, where am I? I lost my spot. But the attempted Berman push to make these two sort of friends and even hint at a possible relationship is cringeworthy. Given that, it's clear at this point that no preposterous future retcon about Kira's mother and Dukat was not there, at least. Still, when I think of Kira featured episodes like this and other teaming her with Dukat or her ignorance as Odo's love interest in Crossfire, All those episodes are skippable, and that's a shame for one of my favorite characters. As for this Dukat, who is trying to do better, while there are at least clear reminders of his wish to be somebody and a superior autocrat is still there below the surface, it's hard to buy. I mean, yes, some of Paul Wraith believer Dukat is more cartoonish by comparison, and I guess this season does add some complexity to Dukat's character, maybe too much dangling. A hint of redemption is just hard to take in. I give it 3 Klingon ships to capture out of 10. You know what? I just recently... Well, I think I've always preferred Paul Wraith obsessed Dukat over nice Dukat. But I just recently acquired a better appreciation for Paul Wraith Dukat. Because I don't think he's cartoonish. Like, I was just watching this news program, this YouTube channel, that was breaking down... It was doing this, like, news story about... Like, it's not about Star Trek or TV shows. It's about the news. And it was doing a breakdown of the Epstein controversy involving Trump. And it mentioned the Covenant, and it broke down the episode and compared it to Trump. Compared Dukat to Trump in terms of being a cult leader, where there's cult people who would rather die than believe that their dear leader is actually conning them, where he clearly is, which is what Dukat did in Covenant. So the Trump comparison actually made me appreciate that storyline and find it that it is realistic, because it's compared to something that is actually happening right now. But sorry to get all political on you, but not you, Norman, but anyone else watching this who keep my politics out of Star Trek, which is inherently political, so it doesn't actually work. But to be fair, I do try to avoid bringing my politics in, except for in cases where it's so relevant, such as this one. So actually, I don't mind Paul Wraith Dukat. Honestly, I definitely... But you bring up a really good point about Kira and how... Because I do... Thinking about her Season 4 episodes, and even her Season 5 ones, for that matter, they're not very good. So I do feel like they did underplay her character, and yeah, the whole teaming her up with Dukat is... But anyway, next comment is from Brandon Newhouse, who says, "Seems to me that the title of this episode is premature because Gul Dukat has not been forgiven by the Cardassian government yet. And the idea of taking on the Klingon Empire with one bird of prey seems overly ambitious and quite boring to watch. Dukat seems overly confident, and why does Kira accept his invitation to dinner? This episode is noteworthy for the introduction of Damar. At least Dukat has the sense to leave Ziyal on DS9. 6 disgraced Cardassians wanting to learn from a Bajoran terrorist out of 10. Well, not to be a well-actually guy, but well-actually, Dukat was forgiven by the Cardassian government at the end of the episode. He just rejects that forgiveness because he doesn't want to be a bureaucrat. He wants to go out and fight the Klingons, to be fair. But yes, I asked the same thing. Why did Kira accept his invitation for dinner? That's something later on in Season 6 she will not do. She would outright refuse to get a dinner with him, which is, why didn't you do that here too? That's my question. And, yeah, I mean, Dukat did leave Ziyal and Deep Space Nine, but he had to be convinced by Kira to do so, so don't give him too much credit. Now, a couple things I want to address for previous comments that I forgot to address is, Stephen Kinney mentioned that how Dukat doesn't really love his daughter. Does he even give a shit about his sons? I actually think he does. I think his love for his daughter is legitimate. I don't think he's lying. I think that's made very clear in the episode Sacrifice of Angels. And further, I think he does care about his sons. It's just that at this stage, his wife left him and took their children with her, so he doesn't really have a chance. But if you see in the episode By Infernal's Light, he says, I'm doing this for my son and for all our sons. And I think he's being sincere that he does want to leave a dynasty behind him on his sons to take over for him after he dies. But he also cares about his daughter as well. It's just his sons are just never seen on screen, so it's hard for us to actually see him caring about his sons. God, and sorry, there was one other thing I wanted to mention. Oh yeah, the fact that the episode, I think, was it Antarius, that brought the fact that the episode is trying to say fuck diplomacy, the fighting and rebelling is better. Yeah, there are cases where that's true though. I mean, for me, it's more along the lines that I don't buy that the Cardassian government would say, let's seek diplomacy instead of taking advantage of this gigantic intelligence treasure trove that we have. Like, you could kind of do the same thing at the same time, but still be defensive. So for me, it's more along the lines that I don't buy that this is what the Cardassian government will do. Because I'm a pacifist. I'm all for peace. I'm all for finding a diplomatic solution, and that's why I love TNG. But the fact of the matter is, there are times when your adversary is just impossible to negotiate with, and there's no possibility for peace, like with the Borg. And I'm sorry, with the Republican Party and the Democrats should never try to meet them halfway because the Republicans have no interest in doing it. So I think Democrats need to fight more, not less. So that's just another thing, though. But sorry to get political again. But so there are examples where fighting is preferable or necessary to diplomacy if diplomacy is not going to work. But you should always prefer diplomacy. You should always be open to diplomacy. But if the other team isn't, then it doesn't matter how open to diplomacy you are. So, but as I said, for me, my issue is more the fact that the Cardassian government felt this way. I think it's inconsistent, even though it's the new what do they call it? DPACA Council, whatever the fuck they're called. Civilian government that took over. Even so, I still find it inconsistent with simply being Cardassian. And I'm not sure that the episode's saying that Dukat is right for... No, actually, it is. I think it definitely is, actually. And never mind that. I think they are. But anyway. Thank you, patrons, so much for your comments. So, my rating for Return to Grace out of 10 is going to be a 5 average. Yeah, I mean, in some ways I think I should have gotten higher. In some ways I think I should have went lower. I think a 5 right smack in the middle, but on the negative side of middle makes sense for this episode. Because there are things about it I like. As I said, I do like the character story with Kira and how she identified with Ziyal and wanted to protect her from the life that she had to suffer through. That was a good character story. It was an exciting, interesting episode that kept my interest and suspense throughout these tiny little freighter trying to destroy this Klingon ship, and I think it had a good payoff, and I liked seeing Kira shine. So that prevents it from being a really bad episode, in my opinion. But Dukat should never be someone I'm cheering for. Ever, ever, ever. And Dukat and Kira should not be friends. They should not be smiling at each other. I don't give a shit that half the time he's being an asshole to her and she's being pissed off with him. It doesn't matter. That should be 100% of the time, not 50% of the time. She should not be smiling and laughing. They shouldn't be this big happy family at the end of the episode. Just point blank. I should not cheer for Dukat, and he should not be portrayed as the good guy, and the Klingons should not be the bad guys, for that matter. So no, all those things prevent it from getting a positive rating. I'm sorry, but they do. So 5 out of 10 for me. So that is it for my review of Return to Grace. Thank you so much for watching this episode. If you did enjoy this video, please be sure to leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe. That sort of thing helps me out a lot. And if you really would like to support the channel, you could possibly do so by supporting me on Patreon. There is a link in that description below. I have different rewards for different tiers, such as you can leave longer comments in my videos that I will read in my videos, and pre-releases. Got a series of Patreon-only videos that I release exclusively for my Patreon supporters. That where I revisit reviews that I've already made, stuff like that. You can check out if you are so inclined to do so. So let's see what's coming up next on the old channel here. Thursday will be my review for the penultimate episode of Season 3 of Strange New Worlds, Episode 9. And then on Saturday, I'll be doing one of those patron-exclusive videos I was just talking about, where I revisit my review for Meld, the Voyager episode. And on Monday, I'll be back for another DS9 review public on my channel, reviewing the episode Sons of Moog. And you know how much I'm going to love that. Anyway, be sure to check out my channel as I continue to cover DS9, Voyager, and Strange New Worlds, and many other videos on Star Trek and other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.